Sarah Martinez stood behind the coffee counter at 5:30 a.m., her hand steady as she prepared the first batch of the day. The small cafe inside the office building buzzed with the early morning rush of executives, managers, and office workers. Most of them barely looked at her as they ordered their drinks, treating her like just another piece of equipment in their daily routine. What they didn't know was that just 18 months ago, Sarah had been crawling through enemy territory in Afghanistan, leading a team of Navy SEALs on a mission that would later be classified at the highest levels. The same hands that now steamed milk had once defused bombs that could have killed hundreds of innocent people. The eyes that now focused on coffee orders had once scanned hostile environments through night vision goggles, protecting her team and countless civilians. Sarah's journey to this coffee counter had been anything but ordinary. Born in a small town in Texas, she had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends played with dolls, Sarah was climbing trees and building forts. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her to shoot, fight, and never give up. When she turned 18, despite her parents' concerns, Sarah enlisted in the Navy with one goal in mind: to become a SEAL. The path had been brutal. Out of her class of 200 candidates, only 12 made it through the initial training. Sarah was the only woman. She endured months of physical and mental torture designed to break even the strongest minds. She carried boats over her head until her shoulders screamed in pain. She swam in freezing water until her body went numb. She stayed awake for days until hallucinations became normal. But she never quit. Her instructors pushed her harder than anyone else, knowing that in the field, her teammates' lives would depend on her abilities. They made her carry heavier packs, swim longer distances, and complete more repetitions than her male counterparts. Sarah understood this wasn't about fairness. It was about survival. In combat, the enemy wouldn't care about her gender, and neither could her training. After graduating, Sarah spent 8 years serving in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had been deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and several countries she couldn't even name in public. She had saved hostages, eliminated high-value targets, and gathered intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks on American soil. Her chest held decorations that most soldiers only dreamed of earning: the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Combat Phi, and the Purple Heart. But Sarah's last mission had changed everything. During a rescue operation in a compound outside Kabul, an IED explosion had thrown her 20 feet into a concrete wall. The impact had shattered 3 ribs, damaged her spine, and given her a traumatic brain injury that took months to heal. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. The Navy said her combat days were over. The transition to civilian life had been devastating. Sarah had spent her entire adult life defined by her service, her mission, and her team. Suddenly, she was just another veteran trying to find her place in a world that didn't understand what she had sacrificed. The nightmares came every night. The sounds of helicopters made her heart race. Crowds made her nervous, always scanning for threats that weren't there. Her disability payments barely covered her small apartment rent. The Veterans Affairs Office had promised job placement assistance, but the few interviews she got never led anywhere. Employers seemed intimidated by her military background, unsure how to handle someone who had been trained to kill. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years protecting people who now seemed afraid of her. That's how Sarah ended up at Prestige Towers, a gleaming office building in downtown Dallas, serving coffee to the same type of people she had once risked her life to protect. The job paid minimum wage and offered no benefits, but it was something. The building's management company had hired her through a program designed to help veterans, though they seemed to regret that decision daily. Mrs. Henderson, the cafe supervisor, made no secret of her disapproval. She was a sharp-faced woman in her 50s who treated the coffee service like a military operation. Ironic, considering she was ordering around an actual military veteran. Mrs. Henderson assigned Sarah the worst shifts, the heaviest lifting, and the most demanding customers. She criticized everything Sarah did, from the way she held the coffee pot to how she cleaned the machines. The building's regular customers had quickly learned they could treat Sarah however they wanted. They snapped their fingers to get her attention, complained about wait times, and demanded remakes for drinks that were perfectly fine. Some made jokes about her appearance or her accent. Others ignored her completely, talking over her as if she didn't exist. Sarah endured it all with the same discipline that had carried her through SEAL training. She had survived interrogation by terrorists. She could handle rude customers. She had operated under enemy fire. She could work under Mrs. Henderson's constant criticism. Every morning, she put on her uniform, a simple polo shirt and khakis, and reported for duty just like she had in the Navy. The only reminder of her previous life was the black band she wore on her right ring finger. It was made from metal recovered from a helicopter that had crashed during one of her missions, killing 2 of her teammates. A military jeweler had crafted it with the Seal Trident insignia barely visible unless someone knew what to look for. Sarah never took it off, not even to shower. It was her connection to the person she used to be, the brotherhood she had lost, and the promise she had made to never forget those who didn't make it home. Most people never noticed the ring. It looked like any other piece of jewelry to civilian eyes, but to someone with military experience, especially special operations experience, the subtle markings told a story of sacrifice and service that few could understand. As Sarah wiped down the counter that morning, preparing for another day of invisible service, she had no idea that her life was about to change dramatically. She didn't know that among the morning's customers would be someone who would recognize not just her ring, but the warrior spirit that still burned inside her despite everything she had endured. The clock on the wall showed 6 a.m. The morning rush was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, decorated veteran, and survivor, prepared to serve coffee to people who would never know her true story. At least not yet. The morning rush hit Prestige Towers like a tidal wave. By 6:15 a.m., the lobby was packed with suited professionals clutching briefcases and checking their phones, all needing their caffeine fix before facing another day of meetings and deadlines. Sarah moved efficiently behind the counter, her military training evident in every precise movement, though none of the customers bothered to notice. "Large coffee, black and make it fast," barked Mr. Thompson, a real estate executive who came in every morning at exactly 6:22 a.m. He never said please, never said thank you, and always acted like Sarah was personally responsible for any delay in his day. This morning was no different. Sarah poured his coffee with practiced efficiency, but as she handed it to him, Mr. Thompson made a show of checking his expensive watch. 3 minutes. In the corporate world, time is money. Maybe you should learn that. Yes, sir. I'll work faster, Sarah replied calmly, though inside she remembered leading split-second operations where 3 minutes could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She had made decisions in 3 seconds that saved dozens of lives, but here, 3 minutes to pour coffee was apparently unacceptable. Behind Mr. Thompson, the line grew longer and more impatient. Mrs. Chen, a lawyer from the 15th floor, tapped her foot loudly while scrolling through emails. Behind her, a group of young investment bankers whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing at Sarah with smirks on their faces. "Excuse me," called out one of the bankers, a blond man named Brad who always wore suits that cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. "Could you actually pay attention? Some of us have real jobs to get to." Sarah looked up from the espresso machine where she was preparing Mrs. Chen's cappuccino. "I apologize for the wait. Your drink will be ready in just a moment." "That's what you said 5 minutes ago," Brad continued, his voice getting louder so others could hear. "Look, I'm sure this is challenging for you, but in the business world we value efficiency. Maybe stick to making simple coffee instead of trying to be fancy with these complicated drinks." The comment drew chuckles from his friends. Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but she maintained her composure. In Afghanistan, she had once spent 6 hours motionless in a sniper position, waiting for the perfect moment to take out a target who was planning to bomb a school. She had patience these people couldn't imagine. Mrs. Henderson chose that moment to emerge from the back office, her clipboard in hand, and a disapproving expression already forming. She surveyed the line of customers and immediately zeroed in on Sarah. "Martinez, what's causing this backup?" "I can see the line from my office," she snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "In retail, customer service is everything. If you can't handle the basic requirements of this job, maybe we need to reconsider your position." "I'm working as fast as I can, ma'am," Sarah replied, continuing to prepare drinks without breaking rhythm. Her movements were economical and precise, wasting no motion, but Mrs. Henderson seemed determined to find fault. "As fast as you can isn't fast enough," Mrs. Henderson continued. "These are important people with important jobs. They don't have time to wait around while you figure out how to operate equipment." Sarah finished Mrs. Chen's cappuccino and handed it over with a smile. "Mrs. Chen, accepted it without acknowledgement, and hurried away. The next customer, a hedge fund manager named Kevin, stepped up with his usual demanding attitude. Iced coffee, extra shot, no sugar, light cream. And this time actually listen to what I'm saying, Kevin said, as if Sarah had ever gotten his order wrong before. Last week you put sugar in it when I specifically said no sugar. I don't know where you learned to work in food service, but attention to detail matters. Sarah remembered the incident Kevin was referring to. Another customer had accidentally grabbed his drink, leaving Kevin with a sweetened coffee. Despite Sarah's explanation and immediate offer to remake his drink for free, Kevin had complained to Mrs. Henderson and demanded that Sarah be written up for incompetence. "I'll make sure it's exactly as you ordered," Sarah said. Beginning to prepare his drink with meticulous care, she had once memorized the layouts of entire terrorist compounds, complete with guard rotations and weapon placements. Remembering coffee orders was hardly a challenge. As she worked, Sarah overheard two customers talking about her. They stood close enough that she was clearly meant to hear their conversation. "I don't understand why they hire people like that," said one woman, nodding toward Sarah. "I mean, what kind of background could she possibly have that qualifies her to work in a building like this?" "Probably didn't finish high school," replied her companion. "These service jobs are really all some people can handle. Not everyone is cut out for professional work." Sarah's hand tightened around the coffee cup she was holding, but she forced herself to relax. These women had no idea that she held advanced degrees in linguistics and strategic studies, earned during her military service. They didn't know she spoke 4 languages fluently, or that she had briefed generals and admirals on complex military operations. The morning continued with a steady stream of demands, complaints and condescending comments. A customer complained that his coffee was too hot, then complained when the replacement was too cold. Another demanded a refund because the foam art on her latte wasn't perfect. A group of executives discussed their weekend golf games while making Sarah wait to take their order, then acted annoyed when she asked them to repeat it. Mrs. Henderson remained nearby, finding reasons to criticize Sarah's every move. The counter wasn't clean enough. The milk was steamed incorrectly. The line was moving too slowly. Each criticism was delivered loudly, ensuring maximum embarrassment. "This is basic customer service," Mrs. Henderson announced during a brief lull. "Smile, move quickly, pay attention to details. It's not rocket science, Martinez, though maybe even rocket science would be too advanced for someone at your level." Sarah nodded and continued working, but inside, she couldn't help thinking about the complexity of the missions she had planned and executed. She had coordinated multi-team operations involving air support, ground units, and intelligence assets. She had made life-and-death decisions while under enemy fire. She had saved hostages from situations that had been deemed impossible by other military units. But here, she was treated as if she couldn't handle the basic task of making coffee. The worst part wasn't the condescension or the rude treatment. The worst part was feeling invisible. Sarah had once been part of something bigger than herself, part of a team where every member mattered, where her skills and judgment were valued and trusted. Now she spent her days being ignored, dismissed, and criticized by people who saw her as nothing more than a service provider. As the morning rush finally began to wind down around 9:30 a.m., Sarah allowed herself a moment to adjust the black band on her finger. The metal was warm from her body heat, a small reminder of the brotherhood she had lost and the identity she was struggling to reclaim. She didn't know that tomorrow would bring a customer who would change everything, someone who would see past the uniform and recognize the warrior that still lived inside her. Someone who understood that true strength often came disguised as humble service, and that the most dangerous people were often the ones who appeared the most ordinary. For now, Sarah simply cleaned the machines, restocked the supplies, and prepared for the afternoon crowd, carrying her invisible burden with the same quiet dignity she had shown in every battlefield she had ever walked. 3 weeks into November, the morning that would test Sarah's limits began like any other. The weather outside was cold and rainy, which always made the customers more irritable than usual. People rushed in from the parking garage soaking wet, already frustrated before they even reached the coffee counter. Sarah had arrived at 5 a.m. as always, 30 minutes before her shift officially started. She used the extra time to set up the machines, check inventory, and mentally prepare for another day of invisible service. The building was quiet in those early moments, and Sarah often found herself remembering the peaceful mornings at forward operating bases. when the only sounds were distant generators and the quiet conversations of fellow SEALs preparing for missions. Mrs. Henderson burst through the door at exactly 5:45 a.m., her rain-soaked umbrella dripping water across the floor. Her mood was already sour, and she immediately began inspecting Sarah's preparation work with unusual intensity. "The counter isn't properly sanitized," Mrs. Henderson announced, running her finger along a surface that Sarah had already cleaned 3 times. "And these coffee urns are positioned incorrectly. How many times do I have to explain basic setup procedures?" Sarah had learned not to argue. "I'll fix it immediately, ma'am." "You'll do more than fix it. You'll redo the entire setup from scratch, and stay late tonight to deep clean everything. Maybe that will help you remember proper procedures." The punishment was excessive for imaginary infractions, but Sarah nodded calmly. She had once spent 18 hours in a hide site watching a terrorist compound, remaining perfectly still while insects crawled over her face, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly. A few extra hours at work was hardly a hardship. By 6:30 a.m., the morning rush was in full swing, but today brought an unusual challenge. The building was hosting a major conference for regional executives, meaning twice the normal number of customers and 3 times the usual level of stress. The line stretched across the lobby, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. "This is unacceptable," declared a red-faced man in an expensive suit. "I've been waiting 10 minutes for a simple cup of coffee. Don't you people understand that some of us have real responsibilities?" Sarah was moving as fast as humanly possible, but the espresso machine was old and temperamental. One of the milk steamers had broken that morning, forcing her to use a single machine for all the specialty drinks. She had already called for maintenance, but they couldn't arrive until after the morning rush. "I'm very sorry for the delay, sir. I can offer you a regular coffee right away, or I can have your cappuccino ready in just a few more minutes." "I don't want regular coffee, and I don't want to wait a few more minutes," the man snapped. "I want competent service. Is that too much to ask?" Behind him, the line grew increasingly restless. People checked their watches, tapped their feet, and made loud comments about the poor service. Sarah could feel the tension building, the crowd's frustration turning into something uglier. Mrs. Henderson appeared again, surveying the chaos with obvious displeasure. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she announced to no one in particular. "Important people are being kept waiting because of incompetent service." "Maybe they should hire someone who actually knows how to do the job," suggested a woman near the back of the line. "This is embarrassing for the whole building." "I heard she's some kind of charity case," added another customer. "You know, one of those programs for people who can't get real jobs." Sarah's hands remained steady as she prepared drinks, but something cold settled in her stomach. She had endured enemy interrogation without breaking. But there was something uniquely painful about being dismissed and degraded by the very people she had sworn to protect. The situation escalated when Brad, the investment banker who seemed to take pleasure in making Sarah's life difficult, pushed to the front of the line. "This is ridiculous," he announced loudly. "I'm going to miss an important client meeting because someone can't figure out how to operate a coffee machine. This reflects poorly on the entire building's management." "Sir, if you could just wait one more moment," Sarah began, but Brad cut her off. "No, I've waited long enough. And frankly, I don't think you're qualified for this position. Maybe it's time for building management to find someone who can actually handle the demands of serving professional clientele." The crowd murmured in agreement. Sarah felt dozens of eyes on her, judging her, finding her lacking. For a moment, she was transported back to the worst day of her military career. The day she had watched 2 of her teammates die in an explosion that she couldn't prevent. The same feeling of helplessness of failing people who depended on her washed over her now. Mrs. Henderson seized the moment to deliver her own verdict. "I think Mr. Brad makes an excellent point. This level of service is unacceptable for a building of this caliber. Martinez, we'll need to have a serious discussion about your future here." Sarah nodded, maintaining her composure even as her world threatened to crumble. She had survived Taliban ambushes, improvised explosive devices, and firefights that left her ears ringing for days. But standing behind this coffee counter, facing the contempt of people who had never risked anything for anyone, she felt more vulnerable than she ever had in combat. Then something inside her shifted. Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Brad, her gaze steady and unwavering. For just a moment, the crowd caught a glimpse of the warrior she had been, the woman who had stared down terrorists and never flinched. "You're right," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "This level of service isn't acceptable. You deserve better." She began working with renewed focus, her movements becoming more precise and efficient than ever before. The training that had made her a Navy SEAL, the ability to perform under extreme pressure, to remain calm in chaos, to exceed every expectation, suddenly emerged in full force. Sarah prepared drinks with mechanical precision, her hands moving in perfect synchronization. She called out orders before customers could speak, having memorized their preferences weeks ago. She operated the temperamental machines like the expert she was, coaxing peak performance from equipment that others struggled to use. The line began moving faster than it ever had before. Customers who had been complaining moments earlier found themselves holding perfect drinks, served with professional efficiency. Sarah's military bearing became apparent to anyone who bothered to look. The straight posture, the economic movements, the unshakable calm under pressure. But most importantly, Sarah remembered who she was. She was a woman who had volunteered to stand between evil and innocence, who had sacrificed years of her life in service to others, who had earned the right to wear the sealed trident through trials that would have broken most people. These customers might not see her value, but that didn't diminish what she had accomplished or who she really was. As the morning rush finally ended, Sarah cleaned her equipment with the same meticulous care she had once used to maintain her weapons. Mrs. Henderson had retreated to her office, perhaps sensing that something had changed in her employee's demeanor. Sarah touched the black band on her finger, drawing strength from the memory of her fallen teammates and the brotherhood that had shaped her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new disrespect, and new opportunities to prove herself. But she would face them all with the knowledge that she had already proven herself in ways these people could never imagine. She didn't know that among tomorrow's customers would be someone who would recognize her for exactly what she was, not just a coffee server, but a warrior who had given everything for her country. Someone who would see past the uniform and understand the incredible strength required to serve with dignity, even when that service went unrecognized and unappreciated. Colonel James Mitchell had seen enough coffee shops in enough countries to know when someone behind the counter was more than they appeared to be. At 62, with 38 years of military service behind him, the colonel had developed an eye for recognizing fellow warriors, even when they wore civilian clothes and served lattes instead of leading missions. He had arrived at Prestige Towers that Tuesday morning for a series of meetings with defense contractors who occupied several floors of the gleaming building. His consulting firm specialized in helping military veterans transition to civilian careers, and he was there to discuss placement programs for recently discharged special operations personnel. The irony of what he was about to witness would not be lost on him. Colonel Mitchell entered the lobby at 7:15 a.m. during the height of the morning rush. He immediately noticed the tension in the air, the frustrated voices of customers, and the harried atmosphere around the coffee counter. Having spent decades managing high-stress situations, he recognized the signs of a system under pressure. As he approached the line, Colonel Mitchell observed the woman behind the counter with professional interest. There was something about her posture, her movements, the way she maintained composure under pressure that caught his attention. She moved with economy and precision, wasting no motion, demonstrating a level of discipline that was unmistakably military. "Large black coffee," ordered the man in front of him, a banker type who clearly considered himself very important, and this time tried to get it right. Yesterday's coffee tasted like dishwater. The woman behind the counter, her name tag read Sarah, nodded politely and prepared the coffee with careful attention to detail. Colonel Mitchell watched as she checked the temperature, tested the flavor, and ensured the cup was properly cleaned before pouring. Her technique was flawless, suggesting experience far beyond what this job would require. "Here you are, sir," Sarah said, handing over the coffee with a professional smile. "I've used a fresh filter and beans from the premium blend. I hope this meets your expectations." The banker took the coffee without thanks and walked away, but not before making a loud comment to his companion. "You'd think they could hire people with actual qualifications for a building like this. Standards keep getting lower everywhere you look." Colonel Mitchell saw Sarah's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly before she turned to help the next customer. It was a reaction he recognized, the controlled response of someone trained to maintain discipline under provocation. In his experience, that kind of self-control came from serious training or serious experience. Usually both. The line moved forward, and Colonel Mitchell found himself directly behind a group of young professionals who were discussing Sarah as if she couldn't hear every word. "I don't understand why they don't just get rid of her," said a blonde woman in an expensive suit. "She's obviously not cut out for customer service. Some people just aren't meant for professional environments." "Probably some diversity hire," added her male colleague. "Companies feel like they have to hire these people even when they're not qualified. It's all about appearances now instead of actual competence." Colonel Mitchell felt his own jaw tighten. In his decades of service, he had commanded units where performance was the only thing that mattered, where your life depended on the competence of the person next to you regardless of their background. The casual dismissal of someone's worth based on assumptions and prejudice was something that had always angered him. He studied Sarah more carefully as she continued serving customers. Her movements were too precise, too controlled. The way she scanned the lobby, unconsciously noting exits and potential threats. The posture that remained straight despite the constant criticism. The calm demeanor under sustained pressure. Colonel Mitchell had commanded enough special operations personnel to recognize the signs. Mrs. Henderson, the supervisor, chose that moment to emerge from the back office and immediately began berating Sarah in full view of the customers. "Martinez, I can see coffee grounds on the counter from across the room. This is unacceptable. These customers deserve better than your careless work." Colonel Mitchell looked at the counter. It was spotless except for a few scattered grounds that had clearly just fallen from the grinder, an unavoidable part of making coffee. The criticism was not only unfair but deliberately humiliating. "Yes, ma'am. I'll clean it immediately," Sarah responded, reaching for a towel while continuing to prepare drinks with her other hand. "You'll do more than clean it. You'll stay after your shift today and deep clean all the equipment. Maybe that will help you develop better work habits." Colonel Mitchell watched Sarah's response carefully. There was no protest, no argument, no visible frustration despite the obvious injustice of the punishment. Just professional acceptance and continued focus on her duties. It was exactly how a well-trained soldier would respond to an unreasonable superior. Maintain discipline, complete the mission, never give them a reason to escalate. When Colonel Mitchell finally reached the counter, he took his time studying Sarah up close. Her bearing was unmistakably military. The way she stood, the direct eye contact, the crisp efficiency of her movements, all hallmarks of serious training. But it was her eyes that told the real story. They held a depth that came from seeing things most people couldn't imagine, from carrying responsibilities that would crush ordinary individuals. "Good morning," Sarah said with genuine professionalism. "What can I get for you today?" "Large black coffee and take your time," Colonel Mitchell replied, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "I'm in no hurry." Sarah's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. She was clearly accustomed to impatient customers who treated her like a vending machine. Colonel Mitchell's simple courtesy seemed to catch her off guard. As Sarah prepared his coffee, Colonel Mitchell continued his observation. The way she handled the equipment spoke of someone who understood precision tools. Her situational awareness was exceptional. She tracked multiple orders while simultaneously monitoring the crowd and noting when supplies were running low. These were skills that took years to develop and were rarely found outside military or law enforcement backgrounds. "Here you are, sir," Sarah said, handing him the coffee. "Thank you for your patience." Colonel Mitchell accepted the coffee and dropped a $5 bill in the tip jar, despite the drink costing only $2. Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the generous tip, and she started to reach for change. "Keep it," Colonel Mitchell said firmly. "Good work deserves recognition." For just a moment, Sarah's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine gratitude. "Thank you, sir." "That's very kind." Colonel Mitchell nodded and stepped aside, but he didn't leave. Instead, he found a table near the coffee counter where he could continue observing while checking his emails. Something about Sarah intrigued him, and his instincts were telling him there was much more to her story than anyone in this building realized. Over the next hour, he watched as Sarah handled a steady stream of difficult customers with unwavering professionalism. He saw her manage equipment failures with calm competence, resolve customer complaints with diplomatic skill, and maintain her composure, despite constant criticism from her supervisor. Every action reinforced his growing certainty that this woman had significant training and experience in high-pressure environments. Colonel Mitchell had spent his career identifying and developing exceptional personnel. He had an eye for recognizing talent that others might overlook, for seeing potential that wasn't immediately obvious, and everything he observed about Sarah Martinez told him that she was far more than she appeared to be. As he prepared to leave for his first meeting, Colonel Mitchell made a mental note to return later in the day. He wanted to observe Sarah more to confirm his suspicions about her background. If he was right about what he was seeing, then this building was harboring someone truly remarkable, someone whose talents were being completely wasted. Colonel Mitchell had dedicated his post-retirement career to helping veterans find their place in civilian society. He had seen too many exceptional people struggle to translate their military skills into civilian success. If Sarah was who he thought she might be, then fate had just presented him with an opportunity to change someone's life. He just needed to be certain about what he was seeing. And tomorrow, he would return to take a much closer look at the woman behind the coffee counter who moved like a warrior, but served with the grace of someone who truly understood what service meant. Colonel Mitchell returned to Prestige Towers the following morning with a specific purpose. His meetings the previous day had gone well, but his mind kept returning to the woman behind the coffee counter. Something about her had triggered every instinct he had developed over nearly 4 decades of military service. He needed to know more. He arrived earlier this time at 6:45 a.m. when the morning rush was just beginning to build. Sarah was already in position behind the counter, moving with the same controlled efficiency he had observed the day before. Colonel Mitchell joined the line and used the waiting time to study her more carefully. Today, Sarah seemed more tired than usual. There were slight shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well. Colonel Mitchell recognized the signs. He had seen them in countless soldiers dealing with the invisible wounds of combat. The way she occasionally paused and took a deep breath, the slight tremor in her hand when she thought no one was looking, the hypervigilance that kept her constantly scanning the room. Mrs. Henderson was particularly aggressive this morning. Having apparently decided that yesterday's public criticism hadn't been sufficient, she hovered near the counter, finding fault with everything Sarah did. "The milk temperature is inconsistent," Mrs. Henderson announced loudly. "These customers expect professional quality beverages, not the amateur work you've been providing." Colonel Mitchell watched as Sarah checked the thermometer on the milk steamer. The temperature was perfect. He could see the reading from where he stood. Mrs. Henderson was manufacturing problems, deliberately humiliating her employee in front of customers. "I'll adjust it immediately." "Ma'am," Sarah replied with professional calm, despite the unjust criticism. "You'll do more than adjust it. You'll remake every drink from the last 10 minutes. These customers deserve drinks made correctly the first time. The order was ridiculous and would create significant delays for everyone waiting." But Sarah simply nodded and began remaking drinks that had been perfectly prepared. Colonel Mitchell noted how she absorbed the unfair treatment without protest, maintaining her dignity even under public humiliation. As the line moved forward, Colonel Mitchell observed several customers make derogatory comments about Sarah's competence and qualifications. Each comment seemed designed to reinforce the narrative that she didn't belong in their professional environment. Sarah endured it all with the same quiet strength she had shown the day before. When Colonel Mitchell finally reached the counter, he greeted Sarah with the same respectful courtesy he had shown previously. "Good morning. Large black coffee, please." "Good morning, sir," Sarah replied, and Colonel Mitchell caught something in her voice, relief at being treated with basic human decency. "Coming right up." As Sarah prepared his coffee, Colonel Mitchell positioned himself to get a better look at her hands. Yesterday, he had noticed she wore a ring on her right hand, but he hadn't been able to see it clearly. Today, he was determined to get a proper look. Sarah reached for the coffee pot, and for a brief moment, her hand was positioned directly in front of Colonel Mitchell. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The band on Sarah's ring finger was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. It was made from dark metal with subtle etchings that most people would dismiss as decorative patterns, but Colonel Mitchell recognized the distinctive markings of a seal trident, the eagle, anchor, and trident insignia that marked membership in one of the most elite military units in the world. The ring was clearly custom-made, crafted from metal that looked like it came from military equipment. Colonel Mitchell had seen similar memorial jewelry before, made from recovered aircraft or vehicle parts to honor fallen comrades. The fact that Sarah wore it constantly, even in a civilian job where military service might be seen as irrelevant, told him everything he needed to know about what that ring meant to her. Colonel Mitchell's mind raced as pieces fell into place. The precision movements, the discipline under pressure, the situational awareness, the ability to maintain composure under sustained criticism, it all made perfect sense now. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a veteran. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the most highly trained warriors in the American military. "Here's your coffee, sir," Sarah said, handing him the cup with the same professional courtesy she showed everyone. Colonel Mitchell accepted the coffee, but instead of moving away, he leaned slightly closer and spoke quietly. "That's an interesting ring you're wearing." Sarah's eyes immediately dropped to her hand, and Colonel Mitchell saw a flash of something: surprise, wariness, perhaps even fear. She was clearly not accustomed to anyone noticing or commenting on the ring. "Thank you, sir," she replied carefully, her voice neutral but alert. Colonel Mitchell could see the internal debate playing out behind her eyes. She was trying to assess whether his comment was casual curiosity or something more significant. Her training would have taught her to be cautious about revealing details of her background, especially in a civilian environment where her military service might not be understood or appreciated. "I've seen craftsmanship like that before," Colonel Mitchell continued, his voice still quiet but carrying enough authority to convey that his observation wasn't random, usually on pieces made to honor service members. "Special service members." Sarah's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Colonel Mitchell could see her military bearing emerging despite her civilian surroundings. She was evaluating him now, trying to determine if he was someone who might understand the significance of what she wore. "Yes, sir," she said simply, offering no additional information but acknowledging his observation. Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. "Well-deserved honor, I'm sure. Thank you for your service." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Colonel Mitchell could see the emotion flash across her face before she regained control. It had probably been months since anyone had acknowledged her military service, let alone thanked her for it. In this environment, her past was invisible, irrelevant to people who judged her solely on her ability to serve coffee. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, her voice slightly thicker than before. "That means more than you know." Colonel Mitchell wanted to say more, to reveal his own background and begin the conversation that would change Sarah's life. But the line behind him was growing, and Mrs. Henderson was watching with suspicious eyes. This wasn't the time or place for a full revelation. Instead, Colonel Mitchell reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. As he handed it to Sarah along with payment for his coffee, he spoke quietly but clearly. "James Mitchell, Mitchell Defense Consulting. I help special operations veterans transition to civilian careers. If you're ever interested in discussing opportunities that better match your qualifications, please give me a call." Sarah's eyes widened as she accepted the card. Colonel Mitchell could see her mind processing the implications of his words. He knew her background, understood her value, and was offering her a way out of her current situation. Sarah began, then stopped, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. "Think about it," Colonel Mitchell said gently. "No pressure. But someone with your training and experience has options beyond what you might realize." As Colonel Mitchell walked away, he could feel Sarah's eyes following him. He had planted the seed, confirmed his suspicions about her background, and offered her hope. Tomorrow he would return to continue the conversation that would reveal just how much they had in common and how dramatically her life was about to change. Behind him, Sarah stood holding his business card with trembling hands, staring at the first concrete evidence that someone in this building recognized her true worth. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten, hope that her story wasn't over, that her greatest chapters might still be ahead of her. The seal ring on her finger felt heavier now, weighted with possibility instead of just memory. Colonel Mitchell arrived at Prestige Towers on Thursday morning with a plan. He had spent the previous evening researching Sarah Martinez through his military contacts, and what he had discovered was both impressive and heartbreaking. Navy SEAL, multiple combat deployments, decorated veteran, medically retired after a combat injury. She was exactly the kind of person his consulting firm was designed to help, and he was determined to make that happen. But first, he needed to witness something that would fuel his determination to act. At 7 a.m. sharp, Colonel Mitchell positioned himself near the coffee counter, just as the morning rush reached its peak. He didn't get in line immediately. Instead, he stood where he could observe the dynamics he had been studying for 3 days. What he saw made his blood pressure rise. Mrs. Henderson was in full form, having apparently decided that Sarah needed another public humiliation session. She stood behind the counter criticizing every movement Sarah made, her voice loud enough for all the customers to hear. "That's not how you hold the steam wand, Martinez. How many times do I have to explain basic techniques? These customers can see your incompetence from across the lobby." Sarah continued working with professional calm, but Colonel Mitchell could see the strain in her shoulders, the way she pressed her lips together to maintain composure. She was preparing drinks with the same precision he had observed before, but Mrs. Henderson was determined to find fault and clean up those coffee grounds immediately. "This workspace looks like a disaster area. No wonder customers complain about the service quality." The workspace was actually immaculate except for the few grounds that inevitably scattered during normal coffee preparation. Mrs. Henderson was manufacturing problems to justify her continued harassment. Brad, the investment banker who seemed to take particular pleasure in tormenting Sarah, stepped up to the counter with his usual entitled demeanor. "Large iced coffee, light cream, no sugar, and try to get it right this time. Last week you completely messed up my order." Colonel Mitchell knew this was false. He had observed Sarah's work closely enough to know she never made mistakes with orders. Her military training had given her the kind of attention to detail that made errors virtually impossible. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure it's exactly as you prefer," Sarah replied with professional courtesy. As Sarah prepared the drink, Brad continued his commentary for the benefit of the other customers. "I really don't understand the hiring standards for this building. You'd think they could find someone qualified for such a simple job. Maybe she's here through some kind of charity program," suggested one of his colleagues. "You know, helping people who can't get real employment." "Well, it's certainly not working," Brad replied loudly. "The service quality reflects poorly on the entire building. Someone should really speak to management about upgrading their staff." Colonel Mitchell felt his jaw clench. These people had no idea they were insulting a decorated Navy SEAL, someone who had risked her life to protect their freedom to stand in a lobby and complain about coffee service. Sarah handed Brad his drink with the same professionalism she showed everyone, despite the constant stream of insults. But Colonel Mitchell noticed something new in her posture, a slight slump in her shoulders that suggested the cumulative weight of months of this treatment was finally taking its toll. That's when Colonel Mitchell decided he had seen enough. He walked directly to the counter, bypassing the line of waiting customers. His bearing and confidence caused people to automatically step aside, recognizing authority even in civilian clothes. "Excuse me," Colonel Mitchell said loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear clearly. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of this operation." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her expression immediately defensive. "I'm the supervisor here. Is there a problem with your service?" "Yes, there is," Colonel Mitchell replied, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "I've been observing this operation for several days, and I'm appalled by what I've witnessed." The lobby began to quiet as customers realized something significant was happening. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red, but she tried to maintain her authority. "Sir, if you have a complaint about our service, you can speak to building management." "I'm not complaining about the service," Colonel Mitchell interrupted. "The service has been exceptional. I'm complaining about the treatment of your employee." He turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice projecting with military precision. "You people have spent days insulting and demeaning someone whose boots you're not worthy to lace. You've questioned her competence, her qualifications, and her right to work in this building." The lobby was now completely silent. Even Brad had stopped mid-conversation to listen. Colonel Mitchell continued, his anger building. "What you don't seem to understand is that you've been served by a decorated Navy SEAL, someone who spent 8 years risking her life to protect your right to stand here and act like entitled children." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, but Colonel Mitchell wasn't finished. "Sarah Martinez," he said, turning to face her directly, "completed multiple combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. She led rescue missions that saved American hostages. She eliminated terrorist threats that would have killed innocent civilians. She was awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism under enemy fire. The color drained from Mrs. Henderson's face. Brad looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Colonel Mitchell pulled out his own military identification and held it up for everyone to see. "I'm Colonel James Mitchell, United States Army, retired. I've commanded special operations units for 20 years, and I know exceptional soldiers when I see them. And what I see here is a woman who has served her country with honor being treated like garbage by people who have never sacrificed anything for anyone." He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising. "This woman has more courage in her little finger than most of you will demonstrate in your entire lives. She's forgotten more about leadership, dedication, and service than you'll ever learn, and yet you've spent months treating her like she's beneath your notice." Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had defended her, since anyone had acknowledged her worth, that she could barely process what was happening. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer to the counter. "Sarah, I did my research last night. Navy SEAL Team 3, 8 years of service, multiple commendations, medically retired after sustaining injuries during a hostage rescue operation in Afghanistan. Is that accurate?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "And now you're working here because the transition to civilian life has been difficult, because employers don't know how to value military experience, because you needed a job and this was what was available." Another nod, tears now flowing freely. Colonel Mitchell turned back to face the crowd, his voice now quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Every one of you owes this woman an apology, not just for today, but for every day you've made her feel less than what she is. She's a hero and you've treated her like she's invisible." The lobby remained silent. Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Brad and his colleagues suddenly found their shoes very interesting. "Sarah," Colonel Mitchell said gently, "you don't belong behind this counter. You belong in a position where your skills and experience are valued, where your leadership can make a difference, where you're treated with the respect you've earned." He placed his business card on the counter. "I run a consulting firm that specializes in placing special operations veterans in executive positions with defense contractors. Starting salary is 6 figures, full benefits, and most importantly, colleagues who understand what you've sacrificed for this country." Sarah picked up the card with trembling hands. "Colonel, I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to my office tomorrow morning. Say you're ready to stop hiding who you are and start showing the world what a Navy SEAL can accomplish in the civilian sector." Colonel Mitchell looked around the lobby one more time. "The rest of you might want to think about how you treat people. You never know when you might be in the presence of greatness." As he walked toward the elevator, the lobby remained in stunned silence. Sarah stood behind the counter, holding the business card that represented her first real chance at a new beginning, finally seeing a future that honored her past instead of ignoring it. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in the conference room on the 42nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower, addressing a room full of senior executives from major defense contractors. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that commanded respect, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who had finally found her place in the world. The security assessment reveals 3 critical vulnerabilities in the proposed facility design, Sarah explained, pointing to the tactical display behind her. "Based on my operational experience in similar environments, I recommend implementing a layered defense strategy that addresses both conventional and asymmetric threats." The executives nodded with genuine attention and respect. These were people who understood the value of her expertise, who recognized that her combat experience translated directly into invaluable knowledge about security and risk assessment. Sarah was no longer invisible. She was essential. Colonel Mitchell watched from the back of the room with undisguised pride. In the 6 months since their encounter at Prestige Towers, Sarah had not just found a new job, she had discovered a new identity. As a senior security consultant with Mitchell Defense Consulting, she had quickly become one of their most sought-after experts. The transformation had not been immediate or easy. Sarah's first day at the consulting firm had been terrifying. After months of being treated as incompetent, she had struggled to believe that her opinions and expertise were genuinely valued. It took weeks before she stopped apologizing for taking up space in meetings or offering her professional judgment. But Colonel Mitchell had been patient and persistent. He understood the psychological impact of invisible wounds, having helped dozens of special operations veterans navigate similar transitions. He assigned Sarah to projects where her unique skills were obviously relevant, where her success was undeniable even to herself. Her first major assignment had been assessing security protocols for a facility that housed sensitive government research. Sarah's recommendations had prevented what intelligence later revealed would have been a sophisticated attack by foreign operatives. The client had specifically requested that Sarah lead all future security assessments for their installations. Word spread quickly through the defense contractor community. Sarah's reputation grew as someone who could see threats that others missed, who understood both the mindset of attackers and the practical realities of defense. Her military experience, once seen as irrelevant to civilian work, became her greatest professional asset. The personal transformation had been even more dramatic. The woman who had once served coffee while enduring daily humiliation now commanded six-figure consulting fees and the respect of industry leaders. The quiet dignity she had maintained through her darkest period had evolved into confident leadership that inspired everyone around her. Sarah finished her presentation to enthusiastic applause. As the executives filed out, several stopped to shake her hand and express their appreciation for her insights. It was a far cry from the invisible service she had provided at Prestige Towers. "Outstanding work, as always," Colonel Mitchell said as the room emptied. The client was thoroughly impressed. "They want to retain you for their entire West Coast expansion project." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction that had been rare during her coffee shop days. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything. I still can't believe how much my life has changed." "You didn't change, Sarah. You just found an environment where your true value could be recognized," Colonel Mitchell replied. "The warrior was always there. She just needed the right mission." After Colonel Mitchell left, Sarah remained in the conference room looking out at the city skyline. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who had reclaimed her identity, who wore her achievements with quiet pride instead of hiding them behind a service counter. She touched the black seal ring on her finger, the same ring that had once been her only connection to her former life. Now it was a bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. The medal still carried the weight of fallen comrades and hard-won victories, but it also represented the unbroken chain of service that continued in her civilian career. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her new apartment's security desk. "Ms. Martinez, you have a delivery." Sarah smiled, remembering how that same building staff had initially been skeptical of a woman who worked in food service, wanting to rent in their upscale complex. Now they treated her with the respect due a successful professional who could afford the penthouse suite. As Sarah packed up her materials, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The transition from military to civilian life had been the hardest battle she had ever fought, harder than any mission in Afghanistan or Iraq. The enemy hadn't been bullets or bombs, but indifference, prejudice, and the crushing weight of being invisible in a world that didn't understand her value. But she had survived, just as she always had. The same qualities that had made her an exceptional Navy SEAL, resilience, adaptability, and an unwavering commitment to the mission, had carried her through the darkest period of her civilian life and into a future brighter than she had dared to imagine. 6 months ago, Sarah Martinez had been serving coffee to people who treated her as less than human. Tonight she would be dining with industry leaders who sought her expertise and valued her counsel. The transformation was complete not because she had changed, but because she had finally found a world that could see her clearly. The seal trident on her ring caught the light as she gathered her things. It was no longer just a reminder of who she used to be. It was a symbol of who she had always been and would always remain. A warrior, a protector, and a woman whose greatest victories were yet to come. As Sarah left the building that evening, she passed by Prestige Towers on her way to the parking garage. Through the lobby windows, she could see the coffee counter where she had once stood, now staffed by someone new. She felt no bitterness toward the place that had nearly broken her spirit. Instead, she felt gratitude for the hard lessons it had taught her about resilience, dignity, and the importance of never giving up on yourself. Colonel Mitchell had been right. She had always been exactly who she was meant to be. Sometimes it just took the right person at the right moment to help the world see what had been there all along. Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, was finally home.